Welcome back, you beautiful architects of psychological collapse, the ones who didn't just leave, the ones who detonated, the ones who didn't argue, the ones who simply stopped believing. They're whispering about you now, not in coffee shops or group chats. No, in conference rooms with fluorescent lights humming overhead, where specialists in cult extraction sit around polished tables trying to reverse engineer exactly what the hell you just did to yourself. Because whatever move you pulled, whatever mental trick you performed in the silence of your own mind, it broke something they've been trying to break in people for decades. And now they want to bottle it, study it, teach it. You see, cult deprogrammers, these are people who spend their entire lives trying to free minds trapped in ideological prisons. They work with families destroyed by belief systems. They sit across from people who've lost years, decades, entire identities to movements, leaders, communities that consumed them whole. And these specialists, they have protocols, frameworks, therapeutic models that take months, sometimes years to work. But then they saw you. They saw what you did. And it shattered their understanding of how the human mind breaks free from control because you didn't need their help. You didn't need intervention. Therapy, support groups, step-by-step deprogramming. You did something that shouldn't be possible according to every manual they've ever written. You woke up one morning and just stopped. Not gradually, not with doubt creeping in slowly over time. You looked at the entire structure of belief you'd built your life around, the identity you'd performed for years, the tribe you'd bled for, and you simply withdrew your energy like unplugging a machine. No dramatic exit, no manifesto, no final confrontation. Just a quiet, devastating, surgical severance of your mental contract with a reality that no longer served you. And everyone who was watching, everyone who had you mapped out, categorized, predicted, they felt the shift. They felt the absence where your belief used to be. And it terrified them more than any rebellion ever could. Because rebellion they can handle. Rebellion is loud, emotional, reactive. Rebellion proves you still care enough to fight. But what you did, this wasn't rebellion. This was transcendence. You didn't fight the system. You simply stopped recognizing its authority over your consciousness. You looked at the leaders, the doctrine, the community pressure, the fear tactics, the shame mechanisms, all of it, and something in your brain just clicked, not with anger, not with hurt, but with the most dangerous realization a controlled mind can have. Oh, none of this is real. None of this ever had power. I just believed it did. Now here's where it gets interesting. Cult deprogrammers traditionally work from the outside in. They try to create doubt by presenting contradictory information, by exposing manipulative tactics, by reconnecting the person to family, to old memories, to life before the group. It's a process of external intervention, hoping to spark internal questioning. But you worked from the inside out. You didn't need someone to show you the contradictions because you started seeing patterns. Patterns in how the narrative shifted when convenient. Patterns in who got punished and who got protected. Patterns in the gap between what was preached and what was practiced. And once you saw the pattern, you couldn't unsee it. The specialists call this spontaneous critical consciousness awakening. In their papers and case studies, they describe it as rare, unpredictable, almost miraculous. They've documented maybe a handful of cases where someone deep in ideological capture just wakes up without external help. And every time it happens, they scramble to understand how, what triggered it, what made this person's mind capable of self-liberation when thousands of others remain trapped. They study you like you're a key that might unlock a faster, more effective way to free people. Because if they can figure out what happened in your head, they might be able to replicate it, teach it, use it to save others. But here's what they don't tell you in their clinical language and academic papers. What you did wasn't just impressive, it was traumatic. Breaking free from mental control isn't like walking out of a building. It's like waking up mid-surgery and realizing you've been operating on yourself. You didn't just lose a belief system. You lost the version of yourself that needed it. You lost the community that defined you, the purpose that drove you, the certainty that made life feel manageable. And you did this without a safety net, without a replacement identity waiting, without anyone holding your hand through the collapse. Most people can't survive that kind of psychological freefall. Most people need the old structure to crumble slowly while they build something new. But you demolished the entire foundation in one moment of clarity and then stood in the rubble completely alone, completely exposed, completely uncertain of who you even were anymore. And somehow you didn't retreat back into the comfort of the lie. You didn't run back to the group begging for reacceptance. You sat in that devastation, in that identity death, in that terrifying freedom. And you refused to look away. The deprogrammers, they're analyzing this part especially. They want to know what kind of person can tolerate that level of existential vertigo without collapsing back into the safety of the familiar. What makes someone capable of choosing the unknown over the comfortable? What makes someone strong enough to be nobody for a while? To have no answers, no tribe, no script, just raw consciousness trying to figure out what's real. And the answer terrifies them almost as much as it fascinates them because the answer is trauma. The answer is that you'd already been through so much pain within the system that the pain of leaving couldn't possibly be worse. You see, they thought they broke you into compliance. They thought the shame, the manipulation, the isolation tactics, the punishment for questioning, they thought all of that was keeping you locked in. But what they didn't realize is that every instance of abuse, every moment of cognitive dissonance you had to swallow, every time you felt that sick feeling in your stomach but pushed it down, all of that was building something in you. Not loyalty, not devotion, immunity. You were developing psychological antibodies to their control mechanisms. And when you finally hit your threshold, when the internal pain of staying became greater than the fear of leaving, you didn't just walk away. You atomically restructured your entire relationship with belief itself. Now, the cult deprogrammers are writing about something they're calling the autonomy trigger. It's that moment, that single instant, when a controlled mind suddenly realizes it has the power to simply stop believing. Not through argument, not through being convinced, but through the raw existential choice to withdraw consent from a narrative. They're trying to figure out how to artificially induce this trigger in people still trapped. They're creating exercises, thought experiments, questioning techniques, all designed to help someone access that same moment of devastating clarity you found on your own. But here's the problem they keep running into. You can't teach someone to do what you did because what you did required you to lose everything. It required you to be willing to sacrifice your entire social world, your sense of purpose, your feeling of specialness, your certainty about reality. Most people aren't ready for that trade. Most people would rather live in a comfortable lie than face an uncomfortable truth. But you looked at the price tag of freedom and you paid it in full without hesitation. Not because you're braver, but because you'd already lost yourself in the system so completely that you had nothing left to protect. They're studying your brain patterns now, metaphorically speaking, trying to understand the neural pathways that fire when someone chooses authentic uncertainty over false certainty. Because that's what you did. You chose not knowing over pretending to know. You chose confusion over the illusion of clarity. You chose psychological homelessness over living in a mental prison disguised as a home. And that choice, that single devastating choice, it rewired something fundamental in your consciousness that can never be undone. You can't believe the same way anymore. You can't surrender your critical thinking the same way anymore. You can't be manipulated by the same tactics anymore because you've seen behind the curtain and there's no erasing that knowledge. The specialists talk about cognitive sovereignty, the ability of a mind to govern itself without external ideological control. Most people never achieve this because most people don't want the responsibility. Cognitive sovereignty means you have to decide for yourself what's true, what's right, what's real. It means you can't blame the leader, the doctrine, the community when things go wrong. It means you're alone with your choices and their consequences. But you grabbed that sovereignty with both hands, even though it was covered in thorns. You claimed ownership of your own consciousness, even though it meant admitting you'd given it away for so long. Now here's what's happening in those conference rooms. While they analyze your psychological profile, they're realizing that traditional deprogramming might be outdated. They're realizing that trying to slowly, gently guide someone out of mental captivity might not be the most effective approach because you proved that sometimes the fastest way out is through. Sometimes the only way to break free is to face the full horror of what you've been complicit in, what you've defended, what you've sacrificed for a lie, all at once. It's brutal, it's traumatic, but it's also immediate. There's no months-long process of gradually questioning. There's just one moment of absolute clarity followed by a choice. And that choice, that's what they want to understand. Because in that moment, when you saw through everything, you could have chosen denial. You could have worked harder to believe, found new justifications, doubled down on your commitment like so many people do when confronted with contradictions. But something in you refused. Something in you said no. I'd rather face the truth, even if it destroys me, than live one more second in this illusion. That's not normal human behavior. Normal human behavior is self-protection, ego defense, cognitive consistency at all costs. But you chose psychological suicide and somehow emerged from it stronger. The deprogrammers are calling you a natural exit, someone who escaped ideological capture through an internal process they're still trying to map. They're interviewing people like you, collecting stories, looking for common factors. And what they're finding is that most naturals share certain traits: high intelligence combined with high trauma, pattern recognition skills that eventually turn inward, a breaking point moment where the pain of staying exceeded the fear of leaving, and perhaps most importantly, a willingness to be completely alone, to have no identity, no community, no certainty, to be psychologically naked in a world that demands you wear a costume. But let's go deeper into what actually happened in your mind during that moment of break. Because the external observer sees someone leaving a group, cutting ties, changing behavior. But internally, you experienced something far more profound. You experienced what psychologists call ego death, without substances, without meditation, without any of the traditional frameworks people use to facilitate that kind of transformation. Your sense of self, the story you told yourself about who you were, just collapsed. And in that collapse, you saw something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You saw that the self is constructed, that identity is performed, that everything you thought was you was actually just a collection of beliefs and behaviors you'd assembled to survive. This is where the cult deprogrammers get really interested. Because if you can trigger ego death through pure awareness, through simply seeing through your own psychological mechanisms, then you've accessed something that could revolutionize how we understand consciousness and control. You've demonstrated that the prison is always mental, that the bars are always beliefs, and that freedom is always available to anyone willing to face the vertigo of existence without a script. But most people won't. Most people can't. The fear is too great. The uncertainty too overwhelming. They need the structure, the community, the doctrine, the leader telling them what to think and who to be. You didn't need it anymore. Not because you found something better, but because you saw through the need itself. You realized that your desperate desire to belong, to be part of something bigger, to have absolute answers, that desire was being weaponized against you. And once you saw the mechanism, once you understood how your own psychological needs were being exploited, you couldn't be manipulated the same way again. It's like learning how a magic trick works. You can still watch the performance, but you can't be fooled by it anymore. The spell is permanently broken. Now the specialists are trying to teach this to other people. They're developing what they call awareness-based intervention protocols. Instead of trying to argue someone out of their beliefs, instead of presenting evidence and counter-narratives, they're trying to help people see their own psychological patterns. How do you respond when your beliefs are challenged? How do you feel when the group expresses disapproval? What happens in your body when you consider leaving? They're trying to create the conditions for people to have their own moment of devastating clarity, their own spontaneous awakening to the mechanisms of their own captivity. But here's the ethical dilemma they're facing. What you went through, that moment of total psychological collapse. People have breakdowns. People dissociate. People develop severe anxiety and depression when their entire framework for understanding reality suddenly disintegrates. You survived it. You integrated it. You emerged from it with your sanity intact. But not everyone can. Some people need the slow process, the gradual dismantling, the therapeutic support. Forcing someone into the kind of awareness you achieved could destroy them rather than free them. So the deprogrammers are treading carefully, trying to figure out who can handle the truth and who needs to be protected from it. What they don't talk about much, what makes them uncomfortable to acknowledge, is that you might be fundamentally different from the people they're trying to help. You might have a psychological resilience they can't replicate or teach. Because when everything collapsed, when you had no identity, no community, no certainty, you didn't need someone to give you a new framework. You were okay existing in the void. You were okay not knowing. you were okay being nobody for a while. And that's rare. That's almost unheard of in their case files. Most people emerging from ideological control immediately start searching for a new system to believe in, a new group to join, a new identity to adopt. But you just sat in the emptiness and learned to be comfortable with questions that have no answers. The cult deprogrammers are now studying something they call post-control consciousness. It's the mental state of someone who's broken free but hasn't replaced the old system with a new one. Someone who's learned to operate without ideological scaffolding. Someone who can tolerate ambiguity, who can hold multiple contradictory ideas, who can change their mind without it threatening their entire sense of self. And what they're finding is that people who achieve this state, people like you, they become nearly impossible to manipulate ever again. Not because they're skeptical of everything, but because they understand how belief works, how persuasion operates, how their own mind can be influenced. You've seen the source code, you've read the manual, you know all the tricks because you fell for them before. This is what makes you so valuable to their research. You're not just someone who escaped, you're someone who understands the escape mechanism. You can articulate the psychological processes that most people who leave groups can't explain. You can describe the moment of break, the feeling of the illusion shattering, the experience of choosing truth over comfort. And in your description, they're finding clues, patterns, techniques they might be able to teach to others. But they're also finding something that troubles them. They're finding that what you did might not be replicable because it required you to be willing to lose yourself completely. And that's not a skill you can teach. That's a desperation you can only experience. Let's talk about what happened after the break. Because the moment of clarity, the moment of leaving, that's dramatic. That's the climax of the story. But what comes after, that's where the real work begins. You were suddenly outside the system that had defined you for so long. No more daily rituals, no more community reinforcement, no more clear sense of purpose. Just you, alone, trying to figure out who you are when you're not performing a role. And this is where most people fail. This is where most people run back to the group or immediately find a new group because the emptiness is unbearable. But you stayed in that uncomfortable space. You let yourself be undefined, unfinished, uncertain. The deprogrammers call this the integration phase. It's when the person has to build a new sense of self from the ground up. But what they're learning from studying people like you is that maybe the goal shouldn't be building a new rigid identity. Maybe the goal should be learning to exist without needing one, because every